sharing my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
We can. Yes. So, Luiza, did you have any person that you want to invite to see your presentation?
No, it's okay. I'd rather do it alone.
Because
I'm kind of
it's
nervous.
public. It's public, So okay. So let's start the the session. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let us start the defense of the monograph work of Luiza Nascimento Evangelista de Sousa, which in English is called Industrial Policy and the Reindustrialization of Brazil, an Engine for Economic Growth, in order to evaluate her monograph work in order to become an economist, a BA in economics by the University of Brasilia. We have the pleasure to have with us Professor Gabriel Palazzo from the University of Buenos Aires, whom I thanks to have accepted our invitation to be here today in order to evaluate the monograph work of Luiza Nascimento. So, Luiza, you will have up to 20 to 25 minutes in order to present your work without interruption. After this period, Professor Gabriel Palazzo will make his comments and questions to you without being interrupted. After that, you will answer his comments and his questions. And after that, I will make my own comments as your supervisor in this work. And then I will ask you to leave the room for me and Gabriel Palazzo to deliberate the approval or not, and the grade that you had in your monograph work. Okay, so Luiza Nascimento, the floor is yours.
All right, so first of all, thank you for coming. Thanks, Professor Palazzo, for accepting our invitation for this evaluation. And of course, thank you, Professor Oreiro, for all the orientation through this process. So my thesis is about industrial policy and the reindustrialization of Brazil, an engine for economic growth. And for my presentation, I'll follow the same structure as the paper itself. So start by the introduction, then go by each chapter and its topic. So manufacturing's role in the economic development process, the deindustrialization process in Brazil, industrial policy and reindustrialization, and then finish off with the conclusion. So for the introduction, my motivation was the debate that has been going on for the past few decades about Brazil's deindustrialization process, which has been raising the question of how important is the industrial sector, especially the manufacturing sector, for the economic growth of a country, and then what should be the state's role in this process. And then my objectives were to determine the importance of manufacturing and then analyze how a reindustrialization process induced by a well-established industrial policy agenda can serve as an engine for economic growth. So for the first chapter about manufacturing's role in the economic development process, I start by comparing the orthodox and heterodox interpretations about manufacturing's importance. So for orthodox economists, as we know, development depends on the market, its supply and demand conditions as dictated by Say's law. So economic growth is sector independent and the market has self-regulating mechanisms. So it will always tend to an equilibrium. It doesn't matter on the differences between the sectors. And on the contrary, for heterodox economists, economic growth is sector-specific, and manufacturing is especially important in the Caldorian and new developmentalist perspectives, as manufacturing has intrinsic characteristics as capital accumulation, technological progress, productive sophistication, and increasing returns to scale and positive externalities, which I'll talk about better in the next few topics. So I talk about the participation in the composition of the productive structure. And then so how a higher participation of the sector in the productive structures composition can lead to growth. And then I dive into the characteristics that I mentioned before. And then here I have some of the main factors and authors that I use as references. So Calder's explanations on the scale properties of the sectors, and then Tirol's studies on the differences between countries' growth rates due to their trade specialization patterns, so if they focus in industrialized products or not. And then Rosenstein and Rodin's studies on externalities caused by industrial activities. And Broderick's study on how productivity grows faster in the manufacturing sectors than in other sectors. And of course, some of the very important aspects related to manufacturing are also the spillover effect. So how technological progress and capital accumulation occur more often in the manufacturing sector than in other sectors, and it's more easily spread through to the other sectors. Also backward and forward linkages, so how an increase in demand for goods and services that can be used in the manufacturing sector, and then also an increase in the supply of products and services that can be used by other sectors. Also Engel's law, so how industrialized goods have a higher income elasticity of demand than other products, and Verdun's law, which I explained also on the next slide. So here I have, for the third topic, I have empirical evidence about showing how the manufacturing share in the economy is related to economic growth. I apologize for the image quality is not that good. So for this first graph, I took from Hauscha's article from 2018. And it shows the change in the share of manufacturing value added in the global manufacturing GDP. So we can see that there's a positive correlation between manufacturing and GDP growth. And we can see that Brazil, as well as other Latin American countries, are in this bar here, which is representative of a deindustrialization process and lower GDP growth rates. And then we can also notice that some Asian countries are on the opposite situation, which represents an industrialization process and higher GDP growth rates. And then on the second graph, we have Brazil's manufacturing and GDP growth rates over the years. So the authors, Lamonica and Feijó, they came to a correlation of almost a unit between GDP growth rate and the industrial sector, the manufacturing sector growth. So we can see that it is very correlated. And then I also show some of Tirol's tests of Caldor's law, all three of Caldor's law. So the first one states that there is a strong causal relationship between manufacturing projection and growth rate, and the GDP growth rate. And then the second one, which is the one also known as Verdun's law, state that there's a positive and statistically significant growth rate relationship between the productivity growth rate in the industrial sector and the production growth rate in the same sector. And then the third and final law states that there is a positive causal relationship between aggregate productivity growth and production and employment growth in the manufacturing sector, and while a negative relationship with non-manufacturing employment. So in other words, the faster the growth rate in the manufacturing production, the faster there's a workforce transference from other sectors to manufacturing. So for the second chapter, I talk more about the deindustrialization process in Brazil, and then I explain the concept and its causes and forms. So the most accepted and used concept for deindustrialization is the one presented by Rothard and Ramaswamy in their article from '99, which is a decrease in manufacturing's participation in the economy, which can be measured by GDP or level of employment. But also in 2009, Trajana in her article also defends that the deindustrialization process should be defined in terms of value added as well. And it's important to notice here that the deindustrialization process can be compatible with an increase in production in quantum terms. So even if the production is getting higher, it doesn't mean that there's not a deindustrialization process going on. And then for the causes and forms, the deindustrialization process can be considered positive or natural when it's just a consequence of economic development, but it can be negative when it happens prematurely, so that is before a country reaches its full potential for economic growth. And one of its causes is the Dutch disease, which we'll see a lot in Brazil's case, and it's a term that describes a chronic overvaluation of a country's exchange rate, so that it's above the exchange rate that would guarantee an equilibrium, and it causes negative externalities, making it more difficult for economic growth and adopting and creating new technologies. There are internal and external factors for the deindustrialization, as described by also Rothorn and Ramaswamy in the article from '99. And the internal factors are those related to a country's natural development process, and they're related to its tendency to change the demand pattern between manufacturing and services sector. And then the external factors are related to changes in the trade specialization pattern, which occurs as a result of an expansion of a country's relationships to other nations. And what something that we'll also see in Brazil's case is that the deindustrialization can also be affected by a country's economic policies, which is what I talk about on this third topic. So I analyzed Brazil's industrial sector's trajectory. So between the 1950s and the 1960s, as we can see here on the graph, there was an industrialization process which was induced by the industrialization by import substitution. But then in the 80s, as you can see here, there is a Dutch disease, which is explained by financial and trade liberalization, so the changes in our economic policies. And this decrease in manufacturing participation was measured in terms of GDP, value added, and employment. So no matter which measure you use, we had a deindustrialization process. So for the third chapter, I talk about industrial policy and reindustrialization. I focus here on Brazil's history of industrial policy, and I analyze what were the measures that were implemented and why they worked or didn't work. And I focus mainly on these three measures between 2004 and 2014, which was the most recent period where manufacturing was still prioritized by our government agenda. So from 2004 and 2008, we had the Foreign Trade, Technological and Industrial Policy, or PITC, as we say in Portuguese, which focused on international trade and competitive advantages. And our programs were for horizontal lines of action and then strategic options in future-bearing activities. And we also had two programs called Strong Industry and Innovate Brazil. However, it didn't really work because it was, at the time, it wasn't compatible with the macroeconomic policy. And then from 2008 until 2010, we had the Policy for Productive Development, which focused on investment, innovation, competitiveness, and export expansion. And its goals were to consolidate and expand leadership, strengthen competitiveness, mobilize strategic areas, and they also focused on some strategic highlights. It also didn't work, and mainly because of the global financial crisis that was going on, we didn't have enough resources and stuff. But it was beneficial in terms of institutional strengthening and making it more adequate for future industrial policy. And then from 2011 to 2014, we had the Major Brazil Plan, which focused on innovation, adding value, and domestic production. And the programs were focused on production chains, technological and business skills, energy supply chains, export diversification, and corporate internationalization, and also natural knowledge economy skills. It also didn't work. But one of its main factors that I gathered that was different from the previous measures were that it focused more on labor qualification, and it seeks to prioritize manufactured goods and domestic services for government purchases. And it also focused on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, which is something that is more in line with what we think about nowadays. So, which is what I get into in the second topic, which is for industrial policy trends and propositions for reindustrialization. So I analyze what are the global trends for industrial policy and propositions for Brazil's industrialization. And then first I introduce what should be the state's role in the process, and I rely mainly on Mazzucato's idea of entrepreneurship for the government, so how it should invest in sectors and activities that the private sector is not really interested on or doesn't have enough courage, as she puts it. And of course, the main global concerns nowadays are the climate crisis and the goal of low carbon economies. So with the energy transition and then also digitalization process. And more recently, the realization with the COVID-19 pandemic and also the war in Ukraine right now of the fragility of global value chains and external dependency, so how we depend on other countries for certain products. And so for the propositions for reindustrialization, I use mainly the United States, France, and the European Union as a whole as models for this proposition, as they're the ones that are more focused on the reindustrialization idea, and they have more well-established policy agendas. And I also use a lot as a reference the Industry Recovery Plan, which was published by the Brazilian National Confederation of Industry this year. And they focus on 4 missions, so decarbonization, digital transformation, and health security, and defense and national security. And then for more transversal or horizontal policy measures, they divide their agenda into 9 themes. So taxation, regulatory environment, legal security and state sufficiency, financing, trade and international integration, infrastructure, innovation and productive development, education, labor relationships, and regional development. So that's what I focused on more for a proposition for Brazil's reindustrialization. And so for the conclusion, after proving that there was indeed deindustrialization process and that the sector, manufacturing sector, is important for a long-term economic growth, we then see the need for a reindustrialization process in Brazil, which is has to be made through a well-established and also a mission-oriented industrial policy agenda, and that this agenda should be based on a sustainable economic growth with the digital, green, and energy transitions. And of course, it should also be based on our economy's unique characteristics and development stage, honing already existing comparative advantages, and also gathering more investment and encouraging investment to have more comparative advantages and more competitiveness in the international market. So, and then I'll give you the word.
Well, many thanks, Luiza. Brilliant presentation, very good English. Okay, so now Professor Gabriel Palazzo, you can make your comments and considerations.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for presenting in English. I know that that's more difficult for you, but you have better English than me, so it's great. No, And congratulations for the presentation and for the thesis. I cannot say if the thesis is very well written in Portuguese, but at least when I translate to Spanish, I realized that the structure of the thesis was great. So it was very easy for me to read it, and I enjoyed it a lot reading it. So congratulations. For me, you are already an economist, so my comment is just to try to give some feedback about your presentation and about your thesis. And I mean, in Argentina, we don't have to defend our undergrad thesis, so this is new for me. But I guess that, I mean, the thesis is perfect. You have done a very good review of the literature. You have shown some evidence. You have very nice conclusions. So for me, the thesis is perfect. I have some comments just to, I don't know, to let you know my thoughts about some of the topics that you talked. First of all, I guess that I mean, the thesis was very complete, but I guess that something that you didn't talk a lot was about the commodity boom during this period. So actually, I read and I remember I shared with José Luis a paper from some economists that says that I think that they are wrong, but the papers are very well published. That they says that the commodity boom actually caused some manufacturing growth in a specific regions of Brazil. This economist is Paula Bustos and co-author, so maybe I can share with you if you are interested for expanding your thesis. But still, I mean, I think that the commodity boom is an important topic to try to say something in your thesis or in your paper. The other thing that you didn't say anything is about tradable services. That now people are saying that, okay, maybe we don't need. I mean, it's very difficult to reindustrialize, to have a reindustrialization of our countries, but we can take advantage of these tradable services as software or engineering services that now are tradable, and we can export these services. So maybe you can include, or can you have some thoughts about that. And the other things that you said, just some lines, is about global value chains. It's like, maybe, I mean, we can, I don't know, I think that it's okay what you're saying, but these days a lot of people are saying, okay, we cannot think about the export and import of countries alone. We have to think them in a context of different global value chains. That, of course, in Latin America we don't have a very strong global value chain, or so it's okay for the case of Brazil. But I don't know, maybe you can say something about that, but are more like comments for the future if you want to continue doing research about these topics. Maybe something that you have to take in account. So that's my comments.
Okay, Professor Gabriel Palazzo, many thanks. Luiza, your turn.
Yeah, no, those are great suggestions. I think it's very true. Some of those I just like wrote a few lines on, and like didn't really went really deep into it. But yeah, those are great suggestions. Thank you so much.
Well, so it's my turn. Well, I'm very glad of the result of this work. I think that Luiza makes a beautiful work on a theme that involves both theoretical aspects, empirical aspects, historical aspects, and policy aspects. So I think that is a very well balanced monograph work, and I think that you can also think in try to publish a paper based on your work. I think that can be an interesting thing for us later to think about that. I just want to make a few comments on Gabriel Palazzo's remarks. Well, in fact, the commodity boom was a problem in Brazil, as in any other Latin American countries. But when you saw the time series, you saw that the real exchange rate overvaluation becomes a little before the commodity boom. It starts in 2003, 2004, and mainly because of the interest rate differential. That was an amazing interest rate differential in the beginning of the first term of Lula government. And this amazing interest rate differential produces a lot of real exchange rate overvaluation. That I think that started the second wave of the industrialization, because the industrialization in Brazil is not just one phenomenon. We have two waves. The first wave between the middle of the 80s until the end of the 90s, and then stopped for 4 years, and then restart again at 2005. And then in the process of restarting the industrialization process, the first reason was interest rate differential. Then later was the commodity boom. There is no doubt about that. The second question, what was your second issue, Palazzo?
I think I talk a little bit about global value chain and tradable services too.
Yeah, the services. Yes, the services. I remember. Well, yes, in the Brazilian debate, people were saying, "Oh no, industry is no longer the future. We have to develop the services, and so on and so forth." The problem is that our services, the services that we have here in the Brazilian economy are basically low-tech services that are linked to mainly the subsistence sector in terms of leaves, that now is not in the agriculture, but is a urban subsistence sector. So the idea that you can develop high-tech services without high-tech manufacturing industry, it simply makes no sense and has no empirical basis. The most developed, most high-tech services are, in Europe, for instance, are in Germany, not in Greece, for instance. Greece, the huge service sector of Greece is tourism, which is not exactly high-tech or even a medium-tech service sector. And in Brazil, the service sector is basically, restaurants, hairdressers, washing cars, and so on and so forth. So with this kind of service sectors, that is impossible to have high productivity growth. So it's impossible to have real GDP growth in the long term. So I think that the debate on the service sectors is displaced, because the high-tech services is linked with the manufacturing sector.
I think
so,
could
yeah.
be, but still it's not a critic about the thesis. It's just a comment. For example, in Argentina, we have we have our tradable service in software grew a lot during the last 20 years. We are not doing that good in manufacturing. So maybe there are some cases that that you still can have some interesting development in tradable services, but still, I mean, I agree. I think that in the industry and manufacturing is still very important to all the countries, because actually most of the research and development expenditure is in manufacturing around the world. So still, I think it's very important. Just trying to, my comment was more like trying to anticipate what other people can say about this topic, but just that.
Okay, well, Luiza, do you want to tell anything in your defense?
No, just thank you for being here and for all the comments and suggestions.
Okay, Luiza, so I will ask you to leave the room for 5 to 10 minutes. If we end before I call you by WhatsApp to enter again, okay? Now I have to stop recording because now the session will be... Okay, Luiza, after the deliberations of me and Professor Gabriel Palazzo, we decided by unanimity to approve your monograph work and give to you a grade SS. In Spain or Argentina will be sobresaliente, no? But sorry. So your monograph is approved, and from this moment on, you deserve the title of BA in Economics by the University of Brasilia. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations, you did an
So
amazing
you're
work.
supposed to speak something.
Yes,
Oh,
you did an. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
just thank you so much, and of course, especially thank you to Professor Oreiro for all the orientation and knowledge that he shared with me throughout this whole process. And I'm very glad, and thank you for the grade. I'm very happy with it.
So what's your plans for the future? You want to make a master or just go to the job market?
Yeah, no, I want to get a master's, but with the UNPEC in the exam in September, I don't think I'll have enough time to study for it for this year, so I'll probably do it next year.
Next year, the exam,
Yeah.
yes, it's better. In order to got a good place in
Yeah.
Brazilian universities, you have to study at least 1 year.
Yeah.
So, but you have any preferences in Brazil?
Not for the moment, no. I think maybe FGV or something.
Okay, so people, I declare officially finished the session of defense of the monograph work of Luiza. Thank you, Professor Gabriel Palazzo, for accepting our invitation to be here today. And Luiza, congratulations to now be formally an economist. Okay, so people, bye-bye. See you later.
Thank you very much, and congratulations.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.